Okay, this video is Does Leaky Gut Make You Stupid? This is part 2, and we're going to discuss the work of Douglas Kell, PhD from England, as well as his partner in research, Atheresia Pretorius. She's from South Africa. She's also a PhD. Both of them are brilliant. So we're going to talk about the effect of leaky gut on the brain. There's a lot of interesting things about this. As a matter of fact, there's a talk about it. Well, I'll get into that other stuff later. But okay, first of all, I want to show you Jacqueline du Pré. Okay, Jacqueline du Pré was like considered the best cellist in the world, like back around 1970. And I show you this picture, around 1980. I show you this picture because, when I was in high school, I fell in love with this musician who ended up going to Juilliard. Was like this great musician, great lady. But we used to listen to CDs of Jacqueline du Pré, and it was very sad. She got multiple sclerosis, and she was dead pretty soon after that, about 10 years after that. And her husband's a world famous musician, Daniel Barenboim. And so despite them being wealthy and world famous, they went through conventional therapy, I would expect, and lousy outcome, dead pretty fast, okay, from multiple sclerosis. Interesting picture, too. You look at the picture here, look at their bodies, okay? He's kind of like a typical man, he's got about as much shoulders as he does. His shoulders are wider than his lower extremities. Look at her, relatively small shoulders, relatively big legs. A woman's carries her omega-3 fats for the baby in her thighs and in her gluteal region, her butt. That's why women got big butts, because it's an energy efficient area to carry it there. She don't need big shoulders because our ancestors worried about starving to death. She just needs to control the children up until they're hit puberty and the boys are able to go off with the men. All right, so anyways, and the girls were able to take care of themselves, working around mama. They don't need to be carried around. So anyways, this is a sad story there, and I have another relevant thing to that. My girlfriend's mother got lupus, and they asked me at the time, what should we do? And I'm like, well, you just go to the specialist, and I help them to find the best specialist around. And she had a terrible outcome, miserable, awful. And at that time, I was young. I was just like a medical student. I didn't know any better. I thought, when somebody has a problem, you just go to the best specialist. What I've learned since then is anybody who, goes on the internet and reads can know more than any of the internal medicine specialties about nutrition and toxicology. And quite often, for a lot of things like autoimmune diseases, that's the most important thing. You have a better odds of curing yourself from diabetes by going on the internet and looking up how do you cure diabetes than you do going to Ivy League University endocrine specialist. Same thing with rheumatology. You go on the internet, you look up how to prevent leaky gut, you can cure yourself. You go to some Ivy League rheumatologist, they'll put you on all these heavy drugs. Coronary artery disease, you go on the internet, look up a vegan diet, Esselstyn, you cure yourself. You go to the Ivy League, they'll put a stent in and do open heart surgery on you. Hypertension, the same type of thing. So anyways, it pissed me off that I didn't realize this at a younger age, that you could just read into any field. Basically, surgery, you need experience. Same thing with radiology, same thing with, pathology, looking at a microscope. But the internal medicine fields, man, their textbooks are a joke, including their internal medicine subspecialties. They're just bogus, designed to sell drugs. Okay, continuing on here with leaky gut. So I never even heard of leaky guts until about 20 years after I was or at least 15 years after I was out of med school. That's ridiculous. It's not even in the chapters on autoimmune disease. All right. So here's a picture of the intestinal lining, and basically there's little tight junctions between the lining cells. The gut is called the enteric tract, so the cells that line the intestine are called the enterocytes. CYTE means cell, and these are the tight junctions that prevent bacteria or large molecules from breaking through the wall. If you've got leaky gut, as one sees here, then bacterial toxins like LPS, lipopolysaccharide, can get through and cause quite a bit of inflammation. Even entire bacteria themselves can sometimes break through. When an entire bacteria breaks through, you get what are called MAMPs, microbial associated molecular patterns, meaning that the immune system recognizes things characteristic of a microbe, of a bacteria, for example. You can also sometimes call them pathogen associated molecular patterns. Okay, when tissue is damaged, you get what are called DAMPs, damage associated molecular patterns. Those end up being important for autoimmune disease because antibodies can be formed to them, and in particular, the DAMPs, coming from an animal protein source. When you eat an animal food, its protein gets across here in bigger amounts than normally gets through. Typically only about 3 carbons or less. So a tripeptide or 2 carbons, two amino acids or 3 amino acids, dipeptide, tripeptide, get through, and that's no big deal. But when a big chunk of protein gets through, like let's say from dairy, and you got leaky gut simultaneously, the immune system cells will form antibodies to it, and those antibodies could cross-react with the human body. That's called molecular mimicry, in that the amino acid sequence of the animal protein mimics those of the human, with autoantibody, antibodies directed against self, cross-reactivity, meaning the antibody from the animal protein you ingested cross-reacts now with your own body. And that's sort of a autoimmune mechanism, leaky gut, and that's the most common mechanism of autoimmune disease. Here's some vocabulary for anybody who wants it. The main word to know on this list is SCFA, short-chain fatty acids. The good gut bacteria take the fiber that we eat and they convert it into short-chain fatty acids. And the most important of these, 2-carbon acetate, 3-carbon propionate, 4-carbon butyrate. The most important one is butyrate, and colon lining cells, colonocytes, colon enterocytes, get about 2/3 of their energy from these short-chain fatty acids, and they use those to maintain tight junctions. That's real important. Okay, here's just a little more detail. So here you got the enterocytes, and then they secrete all this mucus and some also protective chemicals into the mucus layer. And normally the bacteria should not be contacting these enterocytes. There's other cells like the goblets, which in particular secrete lots of mucus cells. There's immune system cells like the dendritic cell, almost dendrite star-like. They'll have a projection going up into the mucus layer. Okay. And that's pretty much how the gut protects itself. It's only a single line of cells is your intestinal barrier there. Okay, and so this is what bacteria and pathogens are trying to do. They're trying to breach the line. And this is a beautiful painting by Don Troiani. It's called The Battle of Fort New York. In November 1776, the mercenary soldiers, the German Hessians, overran the walls at Fort New York of the Americans. And it was because GW had screwed up. He had been greedy. He tried to leave men stationed in the New York area when he really didn't have the resources to do that, and they were overrun. But he learned from it, and GW was a great heroic man, and he did a lot of great things. But I thought this was an awesome painting. This painting was also famous because the wife of one of the Americans there, her name is Corbin, Margaret Cochran Corbin, probably Irish. She, when her husband was shot and killed, she went and helped out with the cannons very bravely, and of course the Germans killed her. Okay, this is from the movie A Few Good Men. Jack Nicholson was commanding officer Colonel Jessup, and then Tom Cruise was Lieutenant Caffey of the JAG Corps of lawyers, and Nicholson is being questioned. So, Tom Cruise said he wants answers. Nicholson says, "You want answers?" Tom Cruise, Lieutenant Caffey, "I think I'm entitled to them." Nicholson, Jessup, "You want answers?" Caffey, "I want the truth." Jessup, "You can't handle the truth. Son, we live in a world that has walls, and those walls have to be guarded by men with guns. Who's going to do it? You? I have a greater responsibility than you could possibly fathom. You curse the Marines. You have that luxury. You have the luxury of not knowing what I know. And my existence, while grotesque and incomprehensible to you, saves lives. You don't want the truth, because deep down, in places you don't talk about at parties, you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. Okay, so that's from the movie A Few Good Men with Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson. So I think that's rather funny. I think this was about like guarding a base in Guantanamo, Cuba or something far away like that. That was back, I don't know when this was, like around 1990 or something. I don't know when it was. But that's the mentality of America back then. Nowadays, we don't even guard the Mexican border. Are you kidding me? We'll make a new movie. Open up the border, open it up wide. Okay, so anyways. All right, what does fiber do? The main thing you need to know about fiber is it feeds the good gut bacteria, and they use that fiber to maintain the gut lining, the tight junctions, and prevent stuff from getting through, leaky gut. The fiber also adds liquid to the stool and softens it so you don't strain, you're not constipated, and you're pumping out cow patties instead of Tootsie Rolls. So it prevents abdominal pressure syndrome. Meat eater, processed food eaters, there's no fiber in meat. There's very little in processed food. They get constipated. They form balls of stool in their appendix, get appendicitis. They're constipated, straining hard at defecation. It's called the Valsalva maneuver to tighten up your abdominal muscles to strain at defecation. And when you push back on them, you get diverticulosis. Those pop, you get diverticulitis. You get increased colon cancer. You get increased varicose vein because that pressure is transmitted into the leg veins. Pressure is transmitted into the scrotal veins, varicocele. So yes, being constipated can make you infertile, a man, because it heats up his balls from the varicocele. And it's dilated veins in the scrotum, heats up the testicles. They don't produce testosterone as effectively. Rectal hemorrhoids, etc. And the stomach will pop into the chest. Hiatal hernia, that's associated with gastroesophageal reflux, typically abbreviated GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. Okay, this is just another picture, a little more detail about how the bad bacteria, they will take the bile acids and convert them into hydrogen sulfide, which is relatively toxic. That causes enterocyte apoptosis, which means death of enterocyte, colon lining cells, which of course worsens leaky gut. Like I said, the bacteria are not supposed to get up close and tight with the enterocytes, because when they do, they start breaking through the tight junctions and damaging the intestinal wall. And besides the tight junctions, there's also a question of the mucus production. When you eat the high-fat diet, processed food diet, the enterocytes don't make as much mucus, and that allows the bacteria to get closer to them and start, breaching that wall, like I just showed you that picture when the German mercenary Hessians breached the wall at Fort New York, okay? So you need that mucus, and you need those tight junctions. And you don't want bad bacteria making hydrogen sulfide. Also, when a person is psychologically stressed out, they decrease blood flow to the gut. They tighten up the arteries. That's called vasoconstriction. And that gut ischemia compromises the health of the gut as well and increases the risk of leaky gut. So excessive psychological stress, yes, it causes leaky gut. Excessive psychological stress combined with sleep deprivation and caffeine, which raise the same hormones, catecholamines, epinephrine, norepinephrine, those contribute to leaky gut. All right, here's just a picture, The main one to look at is, here's a vegetarian diet. You got tons of fiber, so you got a good mucus layer. You got the short-chain fatty acids being used by the epithelial layer, and everything is as it should be. All right? Now here's an example of a ketogenic diet shown in this paper. You don't got the fiber, and the bacteria are just busting through this mucus layer, which is inadequate, and now the tight junction's broken down. Bacteria are busting through the barrier, and so are their toxins like lipopolysaccharide LPS from the gram-negatives, LTA from the gram-positive, lipoteichoic acid, and it's a big mess. It's a disaster. This will cause Crohn's disease. It'll cause ulcerative colitis. It'll cause irritable bowel syndrome. And then that's just a local inflammatory effect. And you start getting these autoantibodies, you can get systemic problems all over the place. Very common, most common cause of thyroiditis, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and eventual hypothyroidism. All these other diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, you name it. Okay. Now, I love the way they try to pretend that the Mediterranean diet is good. The Mediterranean diet stinks, but the Mediterranean diet is the most common thing that the journal articles try to pretend is good. They know that there's big money in promoting the Mediterranean diet because they need something to trick people with, so that's the choice, is the Mediterranean diet. Sometimes they'll try to couch it in terms of, it's the traditional Mediterranean diet, which theoretically is a little bit better, but the public hears the word Mediterranean diet, and it's something to be avoided. We talked about that in other lectures. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all these in detail, but just so you're aware, I made another video where I discussed these all in detail. The meat and processed food diet's the main thing, and there's lots of other things that affect it. BT corn. I avoid all these soaps. I don't even put laundry detergent on my laundry. I don't use any toothpaste or mouthwash. I don't even use a dishwasher. If you don't cook with oil, you don't need a dishwasher. All artificial things are bad. All these artificial sweeteners are bad for you. Non-stick cookware, it's bad. Watch out for all these endocrine disrupting chemicals. High fructose corn syrups associated with leaky gut. We talked about psychological stress, lack of sleep. And by the way, I'll just tell you real quick, this is one of my family nicknames, Stanchik. Okay, so Stanchik is a Polish guy. He was the court jester to the king in Poland. And it's like when somebody calls you a Stanchik, it's about 5 or 10 insults all at once. He's a little bit short. I'm not that short. I'm 5'9", but I got a lot of family members that are taller than me, so I get called that. And then it kind of means obsessive compulsive, worrier, party pooper, stick in the mud, mope, spoils the fun. So everybody's enjoying the party in Poland, and Stanchik is sitting here reading the newspaper, looking at the maps, worried that Poland just lost a battle in Smolensk, concerned about future events. So anyways, Stanchik is just a way to shut me up. Okay, Psychological stress will do it. We talked about that. Gluten in some people, carbonated beverages because of the phosphoric acid. So some people think they're cool drinking carbonated water. I just think it's stupid. It probably rots your teeth. Watch out for titanium dioxide nanoparticles. Those can be toxic to the gut wall. A lot of these weird industrial modern chemicals are bad. That's why I get organic too, less pesticides and herbicides. Soy spray with glyphosate also contributes to leaky gut. These medicines, NSAIDs, aspirins, PPIs, OCPs can do it too, surprisingly. Okay, we're not going to go into that in much detail here. That's not the purpose of this lecture. Oh, and I made some jokes. I said, you know, if a children born of a vaginal delivery have better gut bacteria. And so I joked, well, if a woman has a C-section, should you put her finger in her vagina and then in the baby's mouth to transfer bacteria? It's edible, not edible. And then, you know, Alessio Fasano, he's the famous Mass General, Harvard Hospital pediatric gastroenterologist who writes and talks a lot about leaky gut. He says you're only born once, but you have to eat 3 times a day. So he's emphasizing the importance of diet over just simply C-section or no C-section for birth. And Fasano's a smart guy. I like him. He's done a lot of good work, but you know, he works at an Ivy League med school, so he has to focus on trying to sell stuff. So he won't go and say anything intelligent about diet. But so anyways, I did enjoy reading his books, his papers, his lectures, but in the end, he weasels out like they always do because they have to if they want to keep getting grant money. Okay, oh, another joke I made. You know, nowadays they're doing fecal transplants. They'll stick a colonoscope up a person's butt and inject feces into their colon through their, you know, transrectal approach. And I said, well, if a wife has leaky gut, does she really need to get a colonoscope fecal transplant? Maybe she should just kiss her husband's ass and take shit from him. I was just kidding, okay? But another doctor said, oh, that's patriarchal and misogynist. No, it's a joke. It's a joke, okay? There's nothing wrong with telling a joke. It's not the end of the world. Somebody makes a joke. Oh, my God, he made a joke. You could have flipped it around, the man and the woman, but, you know, the husband's already probably kissing his wife's ass. All right, the way things going nowadays. Anyways, and by the way, we're going to get a lot of really technical stuff. This is just a warm-up, okay? I kind of, you know, throw the warm-up in there for the audience. I know a lot of my audience that's watched a lot of my videos, this is all baby talk, but there's other people who haven't seen this stuff yet, so I think some of it might be new to them. And trust me, we're going to get in some pretty advanced stuff here in just a little bit. Aluminum also causes leaky gut. Aluminum is in a lot of stuff. A lot of times food is stored on aluminum foil. A lot of times you go to some, you know, buffet or some event and you know the trays where they have the food placed is in aluminum. The water nowadays uses aluminum as a clarifier. So anyways, it's bad. It kills the enterocytes. It kills your intestinal lining cells, which causes leaky gut. It opens up tight junctions. It induces oxidative stress, where it's a very oxidative chemical, and so that is not good. Okay, here's what it said. Cellular oxidative stress level when aluminum chloride, trichloride was on the cells was about 38 times higher than normal. 38 times higher than normal. So you want to avoid aluminum. I go to some, you know, fast food place when I was on vacation, like a place that making submarine sandwiches. And I told the guy, put mine on wax paper. I don't want an aluminum. The guy accidentally put it on aluminum. I refused to take it. And my kids, like, were all turned red. Were about to die. That I was embarrassing them in public. Oh, you're such a jerk, Dad. I can't believe you made a scene at the submarine store. And I'm like, you know what, pal? You do things right as a habit. Always do things right. And it's pretty easy to do. But yeah, I think that's a sign of a weak person who will do the wrong thing just because in that brief moment they socially don't feel. Yeah, my wife's a little bit kind of like that too, in the sense that, in my opinion, that's what a weak person does. A weak person wants to be normal. In my opinion, here's what I say to my wife. I said the difference in IQ between, you know, I said it between me and her, but I'm kind of being a little mean here, but I'm making a point. Is the difference between an average person IQ is about 100, a mental retard's IQ is about 70, it's about 30 IQ points. So I'll tease that my IQ is bigger than the gap between a mental retard and their self. And I'm kidding, but what I'm trying to say is, why in the world would I want to be normal? To be normal means like to be average, and to be average means like to be mediocre, fat, sick, functionally illiterate. I have zero interest in normal. Normal's like an insult. Okay, let's see. Aluminum-induced intestinal dysfunctional lineage. You'll find plenty of that. So basically, aluminum is bad. Other things that will cause leaky gut that people don't know about. Traumatic brain injury, stroke. So a neurologic injury will cause leaky gut. And that's a big deal because simultaneously having leaky gut and neurologic injury means the blood-brain barrier permeability is increased. So bad things that get across the gut wall have increased access to the brain. That'll cause brain damage. We also recently had a lecture on omega-6 cooking oils, the work of Yamashima, Tetsumori Yamashima, with regard to omega-6 cooking oils leading to lipid peroxidation and production of hydroxynonenal if it's not already present, cleavage of heat shock protein number 70, that causing attraction of calpain to heat shock protein within neurons. In addition, the lack of the heat shock proteins because they've been cleaved by calpain, leading to lysosomal rupture, cathepsin getting out, and auto-digesting the neuron and killing it. Okay, so omega-6 cooking oils are much worse than are widely recognized by people. And kind of like the point of this talk, if you don't even have to listen to this talk if you don't want, this really talk is for people who are interested in the details. But the point about this talk is leaky gut is a very big deal. And it's a big deal for more than just for autoimmune disease. It's a big deal because leaky gut also increases your risk of brain damage and dementia. So even if you're not having an autoimmune disease, it could be increasing your risk of dementia. So you don't want leaky gut. You don't want to do any of this stuff. Okay. Here's just another article on aluminum, how damaging it is, the intestinal lining. What can you do about aluminum? Number one, you can avoid it like we talked about. Number two, you can remove it from your drinking water with reverse osmosis or distillation. There's even ion exchange water filters that can all remove aluminum. Here it is, causing destruction of the intestinal lining and causing little infectious abscesses within the so-called cryptolubricum, which are part of the intestinal wall there. Okay, sorry about all these aluminum slides. I didn't realize I had so many of them. Oh yeah, and then there's this group of researchers who claim that they think it's the causative agent, the dominant causative agent in multiple sclerosis. There's other people like Roy Swank, MD, friends of McDougall, and he thinks that the main thing is saturated fat and milk, and I think that's probably more accurate than the aluminum theory. But they found that when they did autopsies on brains, the MS patients had 10 times more aluminum in their brains than did the control population that did not have multiple sclerosis. So those are some pretty impressive numbers. And there's a couple of these autopsy brain studies showing accumulation of aluminum in the brains of multiple sclerosis patients. It's been shown in the brains of autism patients, and it has been shown in the brains of so-called Alzheimer's dementia patients. So it's definitely a powerful neurotoxin, but like I said, it's just one of many. There's a lot of neurotoxins people are exposed to. And inhalation of aluminum from this sort of stuff and from deodorants is bad because when you inhale it, it goes directly through your olfactory nerve in your nose to your entorhinal cortex and your medial temporal lobes, which is really sort of part of your, adjacent to your memory center, let's say, and important for association cortex. It's bad. You don't want it. Don't ever use spray-on deodorant. Don't spray anything on yourself, would be my advice. Okay, and we know that the low-fat, low-sodium vegan diet is pretty powerful. Excess dietary sodium causes hyperactivation of the immune system and increases the risk of asthma, for example. Kempner noticed that his psoriasis patients were getting better. And low-fat vegan, relatively low-fat vegan countries like in China, eating rice back around 1960. Roy Swank was over there, and he said they couldn't find a single multiple sclerosis patient. Okay, so it had a pretty strong protective effect, eating that rice and diet, and they'd eat vegetables as well. And like I said, too, atherosclerosis is a major cause that we talk about in other lectures of coronary artery disease, also blocking the arteries to the brain, and it's related to hypertension and diabetes. Esselstyn cured all these patients with a low-fat vegan diet. So my point is, if you can cure coronary artery disease with a low-fat vegan diet, that means you can cure hypertension, we know, most of the time, and diabetes most of the time. Well, that means you can cure most dementia. And in simultaneously so doing, you're preventing most leaky gut. So why wouldn't you want to do it? And why does it help so many things? Because it's what we're made to eat. It's the species-specific diet. And then somebody else will say, well, in the wild, hunter-gatherer populations aren't 100% vegan. Yeah, that's true, but they've been eating their 95% vegan their whole life, so they're pretty protected, whereas a typical Westerner has eaten so much meat and processed food and junk over their life, they have to detoxify in a sense, and they need to be more meticulous and careful about their diet. Okay, something interesting about Roy Swank. I found this rather fascinating. In his opinion, after extensive study of the blood-brain barrier and a whole bunch of research experiments, he felt that the blood-brain barrier damage was occurring due to what we call blood sludge, and due to especially the chylomicrons, thickening the blood, causing hypertension, causing the red blood cells to stick together, which led to less oxygen being delivered to the tissues in the ballpark, anywhere from 15 to as much as 35% in some examples. But typically people will quote 15 to 20%. And this was damaging the capillaries in the brain, and that was leading to increased capillary permeability in the brain, increased blood-brain barrier permeability. But I think that's an important point, trust me, that you can get blood-brain barrier damage, it appears, due to mechanical trauma from a combination of blood sludge, hypertension, and hypoxia. So the hypoxia weakens the wall, the hypertension damages it, and it's not able to resist very well because of the hypoxia, lack of oxygen. Okay, this is just a couple of papers from the dairy industry, being a cause of multiple sclerosis. Molecular mimicry, we talked about leaky gut, then you got a big protein from the milk getting into the patient's body, deep to the intestinal lining. Antibodies being formed, let's say, to milk protein butyrophilin, and then they cross-react with myelin, that's the lining of the neurons in the brain, myelin oligodendrocyte glycoprotein, MOG, MOG, and that's thought to be a major cause of multiple sclerosis. And, a lot of times it could be both. The same people who have leaky gut are probably getting more aluminum up in their brain, but we'll just leave it at that for now. It was sort of meat eating and milk eating that were dominant things, like when Swank looked at Norway population. The dairy population part of Norway was getting it, but the non-dairy part was not getting it too much. Okay, here's just a brain MRI. This is a FLAIR axial image. Transverse image is the same thing. The key thing that it's FLAIR is that the pathology is hyperintense, meaning bright white, okay, versus the ventricular fluid, the cerebrospinal fluid, and the fluid in the sulci is dark or black. So this is a classic FLAIR sequence. It's just called FLAIR as the name of the sequence. And this is consistent with multiple sclerosis because there's a bunch of lesions in contact with the ventricle. So to contact the ventricle is called juxtaventricular, and they're perpendicular to the ventricle, a bunch of these little perpendicular stripes. And the name for that is called Dawson's fingers, which means a bunch of small lines perpendicular to these lateral ventricles. That's a classic appearance of MS. Actually, you can make this picture even more classic, but it's classic enough for our purposes here. Okay, so again, this is just talking about milk, casein, okay, being related to multiple sclerosis. But the key point, why am I showing you all this multiple sclerosis stuff? Because I'm showing you that autoimmune disease due to leaky gut is a major cause of brain damage. That's relevant. And also that leaky gut with increased aluminum absorption is another cause of neurotoxicity. And that's also related to leaky gut. So leaky gut is a potential major disaster for the brain. That, by the way, is his book, Roy Swank's book. It's a good book. I read the book. I liked it. The only thing Swank kind of screwed up on is he underemphasized the danger from omega-6 cooking oils. But, Swank's a brilliant guy. He's a genius, okay? You don't see too many doctors who figure out a major disease. And then, of course, he gets ignored. I think that's funny. Even the modern neurologists typically ignore him. Okay, the more saturated fat you ingest, the more MS you have. This is in more of his research studies, like on the blood-brain barrier, effect on blood-brain barrier of lipemia. Elementary, meaning dietary lipemia. Okay, and here's the effect of chylomicrons causing blood sludge. So the chylomicrons do it, which is the initial part of lipid digestion, and then also the LDL cholesterol elevation contributes to it, the blood sludge thickening. Here's what it's like looking at a test tube. You draw blood on a normal person. Most of the blood's actually red blood cells. Then you got what's called the buffy coat with the white blood cells and the platelets. And then you got the plasma, which normally is relatively transparent, a little yellowish. When you eat a high-fat meal, it gets more and more opaque, such that you can't even see through it when a lot of fat's been just eaten. Okay, we know that RBC is a little bigger than a capillary. RBC is typically about 7 microns. Capillary is about 5 microns. So the RBC has to deform, fold back on itself a little bit to pass through the capillary. When you eat a high-fat meal from the chylomicrons or from the LDL cholesterol, it sticks them together. French word for stack of coins, rouleau. So the rouleau formation has to get through these blood vessels, especially these capillaries, and it takes more pumping pressure, hypertension from the heart to be able to push this big sandwich of RBCs through that capillary. We talked about a normal red blood cell having a negative charge on its outer surface called the zeta potential due to sialic acids and cholesterol sulfates, for example. And the negative charges on adjacent red blood cells repel each other. The lining of the artery, called the endothelial glycocalyx, also has a negative charge, and all this stuff repels each other, which is what you want, so they don't clot together. When you got bridging molecules, things with positive charges on them that are big and bulky, they have to be big and bulky enough to hold these things together, like an IgM antibody with an acute infection, elevated LDL cholesterol. That's why LDL cholesterol is a major risk factor, the most common important risk factor for coronary artery disease and atherosclerosis is LDL cholesterol, because it sticks red cells together, and atherosclerosis is a blood clot. Fibrinogen, the clotting protein, also does it because it's what's called an acute phase reactant. So when there's psychological stress, or when there is like an acute infection, fibrinogen is released from the liver, and that'll stick red blood cells together. Uric acid can do it as well. That's partly why psychological stress is bad, because it'll increase fibrinogen. Okay, this just shows that, the low again, but that normally the blood flow, the RBCs are in the center, WBCs are next to them, and then the plasma's on the periphery near the arterial wall, and that's called a laminar blood profile, or parabolic blood profile. Kind of, it looks like the fingers of your hand, with the third and fourth fingers being like what the RBCs are if you put your hand out to mimic that. What happens with hypertension is the red blood cells come and they smack into the median divider between the external carotid and internal carotid. This occurs at every bifurcation, causing turbulent backflow here. And there's also some retrograde eddy currents, meaning blood flow in the wrong opposite of normal direction. When there's an excessive amount of this type of blood flow, the arterial lining cells here, called the endothelium, they sense that as being abnormal, and they think that there's an injury, and they start to shed their antithrombotic chemicals, like their heparin sulfates and antithrombin 3, and to express prothrombotic, vascular cell adhesion molecule type things, and blood clots will form on that wall. And so over time, little pieces can break off distally and cause a stroke. It's not good. Eventually, this can grow and occlude this vessel, and this happens everywhere in the body at bifurcations. Okay, here's a typical endothelial cell, lining cell of an artery, and the most important thing this is what Esselstyn talks about all the time, is that nitric oxide is produced. Nitric oxide goes into the lumen of the artery, and it prevents the platelets from becoming activated, from sticking together, from clotting. It goes backwards into the wall of the artery, and it enters the smooth muscle cells, and it causes them to dilate. So that prevents high blood pressure. If you inhibit nitric oxide production, then these will not dilate. They'll be contracted, and that'll narrow the diameter of the artery. Okay, one little interesting thing is when you're warmer, your blood's less likely to clot. Okay, when you're colder, your blood's more likely to clot. So cold weather is associated with increased risk of a heart attack. So you want to dress warm. In my house, because I'm the skinniest person, most of my rest of my family are meat eaters, and many of them even eat processed food. By the way, I'm healthiest and I'm aging the best of them by far. But I tell you this because I always, will wear jackets and sweatshirts and stuff. I want to be warm. I don't like being cold. Think about it in the morning when you first wake up, you're kind of cold, you can't really do much. You take a hot shower and man, you got a lot more energy. You walk out in the hot sun, man, you got a lot more energy. Not if it's super hot, but moderately hot. It energizes you. Our body gets energy from that. That's why you warm up before you lift weights. It makes you stronger. Okay, we got to talk a little bit about the effect of a high-fat meal. So first of all, there's some baseline effect. The high fat itself is sort of inhibiting endothelial nitric oxide. And so here'd be a healthy person. If you do this flow-mediated dilation tourniquet test, when you take off the tourniquet, the artery will then compensate by dilating quite a bit. Okay, they'll say 7% here. All right. If the person's eating a high-fat meal, this is a healthy person, then they can't vasodilate as much. The meal itself is inhibiting their ability to dilate, their nitric oxide production, for example. But now if you take a person who's got baseline atherosclerosis, okay, they already can't vasodilate much even when they're fasting, and then after they've eaten a high-fat meal, they're really screwed. So this is why a person who, let's say you got a big fatso person with a lot of atherosclerosis, and then they eat a high-fat meal with a lot of salt, they're all vasoconstricted and their blood's all thick from the high-fat meal. Then they try to do something strenuous, like let's say shovel their driveway. They're at high risk to have a heart attack from that. And let's say they're smoking a cigarette too, causing additional vasoconstriction. Their cardiac arteries just can't meet that type of energy demand for their heart muscle cells. Okay, the exercise of shoveling the snow, and then the cold weather causing constriction, and baseline atherosclerosis causing constriction. So all those things can push them into having a myocardial infarction, with higher risk, of course, if they're drinking caffeine and they're smoking tobacco. You can see all these things adding up to underperfuse their heart. Okay, so basically the things that will cause a heart attack. And the reason why I show you this things like what will cause a heart attack is what I'm doing is I'm talking about things that drop blood supply, and all these things that drop blood supply to the heart, same things happen in the brain. So being cold does it a little bit. Being stressed out does it a little bit. Smoking tobacco, vasoconstriction. And it's, lack of plant food, so it means you're low in potassium and magnesium. So you're going to be more vasoconstricted. High dietary sodium, more vasoconstricted. Because all that's going to, like it's causing a heart attack, it's also causing a so-called hypoperfusion of the brain. Okay, we talked about atherosclerosis can partially reabsorb itself. The lipid core can be dissolved and go away. Necrotic core can be dissolved and go away. The acute clot phase will be diminished. But the calcification and the chronic fibrotic tissue, scar tissue, collagen that's acellular will not go away. But you'll also make more nitric oxide to vasodilate. So you can reverse atherosclerosis to a large extent. You might not be able to completely reverse it, but you can improve it big time. Okay, this is just the work of Peter Quo, like let's say back in the 1950s. You feed his cardiac angina, chest pain on exertion patients with a high-fat meal, check their lipids in their blood every 30 minutes. And what he found out is that peak lipemia, when their blood lipids were the highest, that's when they would get episodes of angina. So it's kind of funny. You could get away with doing a crazy study like this back in the 1950s. But back in the, Ansel Keys pointed out that sat fat was really bad in the 1950s, a major coronary artery risk factor. So people started avoiding sat fat, and they thought the polyunsaturated fatty acids, the cooking oils, would be okay. But when they tested those out, both Peter Quo's lab, Meyer Friedman's lab, Ray Rosenman worked with Meyer Friedman, they're like, holy crap, the unsaturated fats, these cooking oils, omega-6 oils, they kept the blood sludge much more prolonged than did the sat fat. They're even worse. Okay, so here's a sat fat, no double bonds. Here's a MUFA, monounsaturated fatty acid, the main component of olive oil, just one fatty acid, one double bond there. Here's a PUFA, polyunsaturated fatty acid, like your omega-6 fatty acids. And this will be the double bond here, and then the carbon in between the double bonds is called the methylene bridge. That's a methylene group on there. And the relevance to us is that this hydrogen can be easily plucked off of there and lead to lipid peroxidation. So here's lipid peroxidation. Hydrogen's plucked off. You're stuck with an electron in the outer orbital that's free, unbound to anything. Oxygen will react with that and form a peroxide where there's two adjacent oxygens. And this can lead to chain reactions that destroy plasma cell membranes and organelle membranes, including in mitochondria. Okay, this is just a quick summary of the Yamashima paper, omega-6 cooking oils and how they run down that HNE, HSP, calpain, lysosome, cathepsin theory, okay? And I showed slides in that talk. Here's the big slide that kind of explains everything. And so I'm just making the point that those omega-6 oils are very toxic to the human body. You don't want any, you don't want even one drop of them. I have a friend, his wife's got all these medical problems, including diabetes, mild kidney failure, atrial fibrillation, and it's like I'm trying to talk to her. She's a real nice, smart lady, but I'm like, you have to realize you're at high risk to die and be demented, okay? You can learn to live without cooking oil. Okay, this is just, there's a really nice video. It's at Dr. McDougall YouTube channel. It's only 50 seconds long, and it shows you blood flow before a high-fat meal and then after a high-fat meal when they go into a blood sludge configuration from the chylomicrons and presumably also maybe from the LDL cholesterol elevation. And you see how sluggish and slow the blood flow becomes. And these clots of clumped up cells, they can injure the vessel walls, is what Swank was writing about. And he had one study had 35% drop in oxygen perfusion of the brain. And then you worry about that causing a Warburg effect, transition to cancer and other locations in the body potentially. So I made a previous lecture on all the effects of high-fat meal on blood flow and arteries, and it's real bad. Hypertension, tissue hypoxia, etc. Okay, then I also talked in some of these lectures about the effect of eating a high-fat meal causing your neutrophils to release this enzyme called myeloperoxidase, and that does a lot of bad things. It's usually abbreviated MPO. So MPO has a job. Its job is to help neutrophils to kill bacteria that invade your body, okay? It can convert your superoxide into hydrogen peroxide and hypochlorous acid, okay, and that helps your immune system to function. All right, but it's not good to have that activated for no reason, no good reason, just because you're eating a lot of fat. Because it's very cationic, meaning very positively charged, so it'll bind with the negative charges on the endothelium, the endothelial glycocalyx. So it's up here, and then what will happen is it'll cause collapse of the endothelial glycocalyx. So the negatively charged components like the glycosaminoglycans with the heparin sulfate, all that negatively charged stuff that generates a zeta potential for the endothelial lining, that collapses down, and now these binding proteins are exposed, and the white blood cells will bind to them, and they can also then undergo diapedesis to pass through the endothelial lining of the artery, and this will increase permeability of these cells. It's all bad. You don't want this, okay? So the HFM is high-fat meal. It activates this whole process. Because people sometimes tell me, oh, don't I need my good fats, or maybe I'm wrong about fats. And my response would be, look, I studied fat a lot. It does tons of bad things. You know, the little bit of fat you get from eating low-fat plant foods, that's enough. You don't need to go looking for it. It causes a lot of problems. So these are some pretty good illustrations. More of the same thing right there. The high-fat diet causes MPO release, myeloperoxidase release from NP from the neutrophils. And it makes the tissue more thrombotic. Forming blood clots is bad. That's atherosclerosis. That's going to decrease oxygen delivery to your tissues. Things that decrease oxygen delivery to tissues. So here's a neutrophil, polymorphonucleoside. It's also called because its nucleus is polymorphic. Okay, in the setting of myeloperoxidase, MPO, in this case denoted by these green circles, causing the glycocalyx to collapse, now the neutrophil can bind these binding proteins and then enter and go beneath the endothelial layer into the parenchymal tissues, meaning escape the arterial lumen and get into the parenchymal tissues. That's called diapedesis. Okay, and high-fat diet causes lots and lots and lots of increased myeloperoxidase in the blood. Okay, it'll then attach to the red blood cells and cause deformity of their plasma membrane. So MPO from neutrophils, MPs, binds to RBC, red blood cell, changes their shape, and it decreases their deformability. Okay, what am I getting here? Most cells in the blood are red blood cells, by the way, about 700 red blood cells for every single white blood cell. So whatever happens to the RBCs is a much, much, much bigger deal than what happens to the WBCs in this sense. I mean, WBCs are bigger, but that's still a good point. Okay, so here we're showing that the high-fat meal led to distortion of the red blood cell shape. Normal red blood cell shape is called discoid. It's a little bit like a donut. You got the more dense periphery, and then they're thinner in the center. They're like a bag full of hemoglobin. But the shape of the wall gets distorted by the high-fat meal and the myeloperoxidase binding to it. This is called acanthocyte. Acantho means like thorn or spike. And so you see there's a couple thorny spike-like things projecting from that red blood cell. Look how abnormal it is compared to the other red cells. And here's a kynocyte. A kynocyte's like an echinid. It's sort of like a porcupine. It has spurs or spikes all around it. Spurs, let's call them. And the point I'm making is that's a pretty big deal, that the high-fat meal is causing distortion of the shape of your red blood cells. Anything that's distorting red blood cells away from their normal shape is more likely to make them form clots and to decrease oxygen delivery. You don't want that. Another thing that happens when you eat high-fat meals, you get what's called externalization of phosphatidylserine. So phosphatidylserine normally is predominantly located along the inner leaflet or inner face of the plasma membrane. So plasma membrane is what surrounds any given cell. Okay, let's say a red blood cell in this case. Then it has an inner leaflet of the phospholipid bilayer, its membrane, its plasma membrane, that is in contact with the center of the cell. The phosphatidylserine molecules of the phospholipids, they will flip. So PS flips to the outer layer, and that causes a stiffening of the outer layer, meaning it's harder for these red blood cells to deform themselves to pass through a capillary. And because they're stiffer, these red blood cells, blood pressure has to go up to pump a stiffer red blood cell through that same capillary. So they contribute to hypertension. They're also more prone with phosphatidylserine externalization, meaning movement into the external leaflet of the plasma membrane. They're more prone to aggregating and sticking to the endothelial cells. In other words, they're more prothrombotic, more prone to clotting. So you can see what a bad situation we have here. We have a tendency towards clotting because of the phosphatidylserine externalization on the red blood cells. We have a tendency towards clotting because of all the systemic inflammation, a tendency towards clotting because of the high-fat diet causing blood sludge and rouleau, a tendency to clotting because of the myeloperoxidase effect on the blood cells and on the endothelial glycocalyx. It's all bad, and it's all just progressively adding up to make things worse. Okay, heparin's a way you can break apart the bridging molecules of blood sludge and rouleau formation. That's why it's a powerful anticoagulant. Here's a paper written by Roy Swank back in 1960, and he basically says the biggest effect on blood sludge dropping oxygen delivery in the hamster brain when they tested all this stuff out was the amount of saturated fat. So the saturated fat had a more powerful effect to cause tissue hypoxia, than the cooking oils, the omega-6 PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids. But they're both bad. Okay, elementary lipemia is procoagulatory. Yeah, that means it promotes clotting. Especially because, if you get leaky gut and you get this bacterial endotoxin in there, LPS, lipopolysaccharide, that's very strongly prothrombotic. Okay, we'll talk more about that in a moment. And so is LTA from the gram-positive bacteria, lipoteichoic acid. Okay, exogenous fatty acids from the diet, endogenous fatty acid, meaning breakdown of our own fatty tissues, plus LPS, lipopolysaccharide, bacterial endotoxin. All of these things cause insulin resistance. They all contribute to it. The main thing is dietary fat, but these other things contribute to it too, make it worse. And LPS will bind the toll-like receptor number 4. Bottom line, it's all bad. It contributes to insulin resistance, which then leads to the brain not getting enough energy and potentially can lead to dementia. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. I spoke of that in my previous lectures on diabetes. Okay, the gut-brain barrier and major depression. So this is also an interesting subject, that you can get LPS getting into the blood and it's being associated with increased tendency towards a person becoming depressed. And depressed people are more likely to have LPS and other dietary problems. Okay, now this is a kind of a fancy slide. This actually summarizes some of the work of Douglas Kell. We're really going to get more into the Douglas Kell work. Most of what I've said so far was an introduction to the things you need to know to understand Douglas Kell and Etheresia praetoris and their research. By the way, there's a lot of lectures online of Douglas Kell and Etheresia praetoris. The best one is something called a systems approach. I think the cognitive impairment or dementia or something by Douglas Kell. It's like an hour long. That's a great lecture. I really think you should see it. By the way, Douglas Kell and Etheresia praetoris are pretty respected in the scientific community. He wrote some paper like Iron Behaving Badly, and it was one of the most cited papers ever in the journal it was written in. They're really interesting. And the other thing I think is funny, he's a fat guy. Okay, so the guy's doing this genius level research in his field, but he's a fat guy, so he doesn't know anything about food and nutrition. Like I said, I've talked about that before. Some of these researchers are like idiot savants. Okay, so anyways, here's your intestinal lining, and you got leaky gut here in your cecum, the beginning of the colon. And because of that, bacteria are getting into the blood, lipopolysaccharide, bacterial endotoxins getting into the blood. So here's the LPS coming from gram-negative bacteria. Here's gram-positive bacteria, LTA, lipoteichoic acid, getting into the blood. Once they're in the blood, they will bind, with the LPS in particular, will bind with fibrinogen. When it binds with fibrinogen, that's the clotting protein, it causes a transformation of its shape. It begins in what's called an alpha helix configuration, meaning like a cylinder, like, a can of soda pop's a cylinder, or like a slinky, and the hydrogen bonds are between different parts of the same molecule. It'll then flatten out like pieces of paper. These are called beta-pleated sheets, and this is with regard to secondary protein structure, and they'll stack upon themselves. And the bigger a molecule gets, the more likely it is to precipitate out of solution. So these will often precipitate and become insoluble, and the proteins are non-functional when they're insoluble. So this is bad in numerous ways, and we're going to come back to what this is. So this would be beta amyloid protein, like beta amyloid 42, and it's precipitating, and that's going to cause problems in the brain. And that beta amyloid is, yes, the one you've heard about, you know, the amyloid precursor protein being cleaved and beta amyloid theory of dementia, of Alzheimer's, all of that stuff. So leaky gut and leaky gums, you know, poor dentition in the mouth, allow bacteria from the blood to get into the blood. And then what happens is these bacteria, they sometimes just go dormant and they'll sit around in the blood for a long time until iron becomes available. When free iron is available, that they need that to grow. So that's another reason why you don't want high iron, because bacteria use that to grow. Okay, so here's an example of red blood cells. Here's a normal red blood cell. We showed it kind of almost looking like, you know, they call it discoid shape, a little more narrow in the center. Round, relatively round, almost like a little frisbee, versus here's a red blood cell in Alzheimer's. They don't all look like this, but an increased number of them do, with sort of a crenulated outer surface, almost kind of like an echinocyte we showed a moment ago. When they look with the electron microscope, they'll see bacteria in the blood. Bacteria in the blood are far more common than is widely recognized, because you need special ways to culture them out, anaerobic cultures, prolonged culturing, etc. But once they started doing that, they're like, wow, lots more people have bacteria in their blood and LPS in their blood than was previously realized. Okay, this LPS stuff is quite thrombotic. The LPS, lipopolysaccharide, the gram-negative bacteria endotoxin that's now gotten into the blood, it'll bind to the clotting protein called fibrinogen, and it'll cause an amyloid effect or transformation, meaning that it goes from alpha helix. So when you hear amyloid, what you should think of is a protein changing its structure from being alpha helix, like a soda pop can or a Slinky, to being flat, like pieces of paper. And the relevance being the pieces of papers can stack up on each other very quickly, and they can make a clot. And the blood clot forms in an abnormal way. Normal blood clots are relatively easy for the body to lyse, but when you have this amyloid component added to the clotting, meaning that transformation from alpha helix secondary protein structure to beta pleated sheet, flattened, all stuck together, big conglomerates of many molecules, those are harder to dissolve. So those atherosclerotic plaques and clots are much more difficult for the body to remove, and that is relevant, okay? So this is amyloidogenic blood clotting, okay? And the LPS can cause a major amplification of clotting. They say, look at this, it can amplify clotting by 10 to the 8th. Okay, that's a giant number, 10 to the 8th. Okay, this concept of bacteria, people sometimes freak out when you talk to them about dormant bacteria. They give a funny look. Dormant bacteria? I've never heard of that. Are you sure you know what you're talking about? And I laugh because I have some friends that are infectious disease doctors. And whenever I talk to an infectious disease doctor, they give me a funny look like, what are you talking about? They're the expert. But as soon as I point it out to them in a little more detail, then they get an embarrassed look on their face because they realize they don't know their own field on this topic, okay? And now everybody knows there's dormant bacteria. This is not like brand new. This is around back when I was a first-year medical student. People can get tuberculosis and it can stay dormant for a long time. Dormant bacteria. People can have syphilis. It can stay dormant for a long time and then manifest as tertiary syphilis and cause dementia, like in Al Capone, like in lots of people in the 1800s. I think that's probably what Nietzsche had, okay, when he went crazy, and a lot of other famous people, okay? Lyme disease also can have a dormant phase, okay? Borrelia burgdorferi, okay? These are spirochetes. Everybody knows that herpes virus, cold sores can have a dormant phase and be reactivated periodically, okay? And then there's some bacteria that can even live inside of white blood cells or red blood cells. For example, Bartonella and cat scratch disease, Francisella tularensis, mycoplasma, all right? So the point I'm making is there's a lot more dormant bacteria than is widely recognized. Blood transfusion patients have increased risk of infections, okay? And they showed dormant bacteria of a type called Micrococcus luteus back in the 1990s. They can be very difficult to culture. That's one reason why they didn't used to think they were present. But now that they're using more anaerobic culture media and varying the different concentrations, they're finding out they can grow out a lot more dormant bacteria than was previously recognized. And what happens is, just like you can't walk through a desert 100 miles because there's no water, normally bacteria cannot actively grow in our blood because there's no iron. But if we've got more iron in our blood because we're iron overloaded, and also maybe because we had liver injury from tissue damage to the liver is a major storage site for iron, that iron can become free in the blood and activate dormant bacteria. Okay. Inflammation in general is prothrombotic. We talked about that because it'll have increased fibrinogen protein in the blood, clotting factor, factor VIII, von Willebrand factor. Psychological stress will also increase fibrinogen. During an acute infection, you got increased IgM antibody. That's the acute antibody that's prothrombotic, a bridging molecule to cause rouleau formation. And also when your neutrophils are activated, they're releasing more myeloperoxidase, MPO, which is going to collapse down the endothelial glycocalyx layer and allow adhesion of white blood cells, and also red blood cells get closer to that endothelial cell and potentially clot. So this is just the idea. You can't walk 100 miles in the desert unless you got water. That's how eggs prevent bacteria from getting to the yolk. The eggshell is permeable, but the egg white has no iron in it. So bacteria might get through the eggshell, but it just can't go any further because it can't grow. Because there's no iron in the egg white. Okay, this just shows that men are the blue line here. That's the male symbol. They start becoming iron overloaded in their 20 if they live in a Western country and they eat a lot of meat and processed food with iron added to it, so-called iron fortified food. Women tend to, because they're menstruating, be relatively, have good iron levels. But after they're done menstruating, they start accumulating iron, because the monthly menstruation is like a therapeutic phlebotomy. Okay, this just shows a little bit of iron metabolism. Simply, you absorb it typically in your duodenum, and then it goes through something called ferroportin, the iron door, from your duodenocyte, and then it goes into the blood. It's carried by these transferrin molecules, like little canoes, kayaks, or wheelbarrows, if you will, to carry 2 molecules of iron, and they go deliver it to wherever it's needed, like let's say to the bone marrow, so it can be used for hemoglobin. All right. So, anyways, when you start, you store a lot of ferritin in the ferritin molecule in your soft tissues, and the liver in particular, you store a lot of ferritin. You injure your liver, you can leak a lot of iron into your blood. That's bad. The reason iron is so dangerous is because it's like a fire. You want your fire in the fireplace. Ed Weinberg is the first guy. Eugene Weinberg, I heard say this. You want your fire in the fireplace. You don't want your fire in your you want fire in your stove, but you don't want fire anywhere else in your house, okay? Because fire anywhere else, it destroys things, and that's what iron does when it gets free. Iron should always be bound to something. Okay, it'll cycle back and forth between Fe2 plus Fe3 plus Fe2 plus Fe3 plus. That's called ferrous redox cycling. And in the process, it'll give off electrons. And in particular to oxygen, you don't want that because it can cause these free radicals where there's an unpaired electron in the outer orbital. And then those are like bouncing a super ball in a china shop. They can break a lot of stuff. So you don't want that, okay? And that mechanism of iron ferrous redox cycling is autocatalytic, meaning that it can generate a lot of toxic molecules. Then the next thing is that when there's increased blood-brain permeability, as occurs with a high-fat diet, the same thing that causes increased gut permeability is similar thing is causing increased blood-brain barrier permeability. The fibrinogen in small amounts can get across the blood-brain barrier, and it causes precipitation of beta amyloid protein in the brain. So this is really a key point in the Douglas Cal and Etheresia praetorius theory, is that you simultaneously have leaky gut, you simultaneously have iron free in the blood, you reactivate dormant bacteria who make LPS, and the LPS causes this clotting, abnormal clotting, amyloidogenic clotting of the blood. And because of increased blood-brain barrier permeability, some fibrinogen can precipitate and clot inside the brain, in a sense, almost prion-like, cause beta amyloid to precipitate, and that can set off a domino reaction. A prion-like mechanism. So that's exactly what I'm giving you. Make no mistake about it. I'm talking about a mechanism of prion formation from the blood to the brain via fibrinogen getting across an abnormally permeable blood-brain barrier. And this is a pretty cool concept because, before people wonder, well, how could, a prion spread? Well, that's how a prion can spread. It gets bigger and bigger, and then it pushes on adjacent molecules and causes them to get bigger and bigger. When a molecule gets bigger and bigger, it'll then precipitate, become insoluble. And then because they've got mass effect by their big size, they push on other things and can cause harmful effects on them. You can tell if a person has oxidative stress, meaning more oxidants than antioxidants, because when it happens in lipids, you'll get hydroxynonenal, H&E. We've talked about that before. When it happens to DNA, you'll get 8-hydroxyguanosine, okay? And here's some other ones. Elevated serum ferritin is associated with increased free iron in the blood and increased likelihood of having distorted red blood cell shapes. Okay, this is an AO alert, meaning academic orgasm alert. So what happens is, as a red blood cell travels through a capillary and it gives off oxygen from its hemoglobins, that will start to distort its shape a little bit, and that shape change will cause the red blood cell to release ATP to the blood. And that will have an effect of interacting with the endothelium and causing it to vasodilate. And the relevance being is when the red blood cell is giving off oxygen, when it senses that the tissue it's supplying is relatively deficient in oxygen, meaning it's going to need significantly more in amount, it has this mechanism of dilating the capillary and the arteriole, so more red blood cells will flow through it and deliver more oxygen. It's brilliant. When you study the human body, you keep running into that. All these like brilliant little tricks it does. It has to deal with so much more complexity than we are widely aware of. It's not even funny. Okay, when the higher a person's hemoglobin A1C, the more glycated their hemoglobin is, the less flexible their RBC is going to be. The decreased amount, the lower the amount of ATP release they're going to get to this effect. And what this is basically saying is the less able the vessel is to adjust its vascular tone for titrating its oxygen and glucose delivery to the tissue. So in the brain, as this gets worse over time, tissues are more likely to end up hypoxic. What I'm kind of doing here is giving you mechanisms for causing brain damage. So here it is again. You got this red blood cell flowing down a capillary, and let's say the tissue's hypoxic. It can then release ATP to this tissue to vasodilate the small arteriole, and then more blood will flow through it. You get more oxygen and glucose delivery to the tissue. So here's a red blood cell that's given off some of its oxygen, causing a little bit of a shape change, and it'll release ATP that'll be bound by a receptor on the endothelium, and that'll cause a vasodilation signal to be spread more proximally so that more red blood cell will come up this. And this is all just an example of a mechanism of coupling the amount of blood flow to the metabolic activity of the tissue being supplied, and that's real important for preventing brain damage. Okay, when you've got increased permeability of the blood-brain barrier, leaky brain, so to speak, you're going to have more brain fog because neurons need a precise neuronal milieu to be able to conduct their signals effectively. And if that conduction area, those ionic gradient milieus are messed up, you start having fibrinogen forming clots, beta amyloid precipitating out of solution. That's going to make it harder for that neuron to effectively fire its action potentials as quickly as it would like. And so another question is, are people getting stupider? And I think they definitely are. And I say this for multiple reasons, one of which is, I know back in the 1800s, there was nothing else to do, so people would read these big books. But it was routine for average people to read 500 to 1,200 page novels. Versus nowadays, how many people read big books? Okay? Not too many. Because I know lots and lots of doctors, medical students, and other healthcare professionals, so to speak. And I can tell you, the number that ever tell me they read an interesting book, what do I think of so-and-so? That's really rare. That's only like the smartest of the smart ones that do that. And I know some male doctors, they'll read about one book a month. Okay, and those are guys that are above average. They're probably ballpark their IQs in the 130 range. They'll read about one book a month. Okay, so, all you got to do is listen to an audiobook in your car every day, and you'll read a book a week. Okay, for most people, let's say you communicate, depending on the length of your commute, put a book in your bathroom on a little table next to the toilet, and you'll automatically read another book a month. You'll read another book every week. So, I don't have to do anything. I always read the minimum of 2 books a week because I listen to an audiobook in the car, and I always have a book that I read when I'm doing number 1s and number 2s in the bathroom. So that's minimum of 2 books a week right there. Anyways, the fact that people don't read and they all want a quick fix, through Twitter or some other text message or something, they're heavily engaged in the social stuff. It's affecting cognitive function, okay? Now here in mice, you feed them a high-fat diet and you get a decrease in their memory abilities. You have an abnormal behavior that's like the equivalent of mouse depression. And that's why, food has an effect on mood. And it can increase the risk of depression and anxiety. Okay, rapid and reversal impairment of episodic memory by a high-fat diet in mice. You feed them a 60% fat diet and you'll get decreased memory function in just one day. So that's why I laugh when somebody talks about low-carb, carnivore, paleo, keto. Yeah, right. all these diets do is make people sick and fat, and the stuff, increases the risk of brain damage. I realize, maybe you got refractory seizures and you don't have a lot of choice, but it's not a smart way to go. And just a perfect example too, look at the Tarahumara in northern Mexico with their corn and beans and greens diet, running 100 miles in 2 days. Compare them with their same genetically, demographically matched population, the Pima, who were absorbed in Arizona and now eat the SAD diet. There are, severe problems with obesity, diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, all the Western diseases. It's pretty obvious. You look at epidemiology, it's pretty obvious. They try to BS you, but when you look at epidemiology, it's so obvious it's not even funny. You want a big sample set? How about China before 1970? 1 billion out of 1 billion are skinny, high percentage rice eaters. Rice only got 1% fat. That's why. Okay, just another one. In just 3 days, you get insulin resistance. And we talked about this before, though. You'll get insulin resistance in the brain. So a high-fat diet's the main thing that causes insulin resistance. And the point I'm making here is it happens in the brain. It's not just something in the body, in the periphery. Okay, and the high-fat diet, its net effect is it messes up calcium metabolism. I talked about this previously in my diabetes lectures and my dementia lectures, but the net result is because of the insulin resistance, you can't get adequate amounts of glucose into the brain cells, the neurons, like in your hippocampus, for example, and that leads to excessive amount of calcium being pumped into mitochondria at the location of MAMs, endoplasmic reticulum, mitochondrial-associated membranes, and that excessive calcium influx into the mitochondria can cause them to be precipitated. It damages them. And so it's functioning, in a sense, somewhat similar to an excitotoxin. Excessive calcium, abnormalities of calcium metabolism. It's not exactly like your typical excitotoxins, but it's similar enough the point is made. It causes brain damage, okay? Good fat's my ass, okay? I think it's stupid. Seeking out fat. I hide from fat. I run from fat, okay. Just a little bit more on iron. Iron is a transitional metal, and here it is, Fe. Its main meaning that it has more than one valence, most commonly Fe2 plus and Fe3 plus. And we talked about how it can cycle between the two. It can actually have other valences, but that also makes it really useful within enzymes, that it can hand off electrons, which is a very important thing in chemical reactions. So that's why it's so useful for the things it does in the body. But it has to be where it belongs. So here's an example of iron and hemoglobin, and it's able to release and bind to oxygen based on the shape of the hemoglobin. It'll have higher or lower affinity for that oxygen molecule. Excess of iron can get into different locations, including within the mitochondria. Here it is in the center of the mitochondria, like the mitochondrial matrix, and this can lead to running this reaction. Remember, Fe for iron, ferrous is like Latin word for iron or for rust. And Fe right here is the first two letters in the word Fenton reaction. The Fenton reaction is a bad reaction. You don't want it to run. You can convert, superoxide anions can then get made into hydrogen peroxide, and that can then be made into a hydroxy radical and cause damage to the intermitochondrial membranes through lipid peroxidation. So the point is, you don't want to be iron overloaded. I've actually constantly, when I go to have a blood test, I have them pull off a couple extra tubes because I don't want to be iron overloaded, and I'm gradually working my serum ferritin down. I want it low. I don't want any extra iron on board. And then here's just markers of oxidative stress. The higher a person's serum ferritin, the higher are going to be their levels of oxidative stress. And so that's bad. You want your serum ferritin, if possible, in the ballpark of between about 25 to 80. That's ideal. Some people even say ideal is really between about 25 to 50. Okay, now just a little bit more like the Douglas Calapharesia Pretorius work. So they showed that, here's a normal red blood cell, sort of like a little frisbee discoid shape. Here it is from the side, so to speak. When you start forming clots, normal clots kind of look like spaghetti, these little linear pieces of fibrin clotting and thrombin. But when you've got free iron, and that's causing amyloidogenic transformation of the fibrin clotting protein, it becomes all matted, sort of becomes like a big mess, okay? It'd be almost like this would be like your hair on a normal day if you comb your hair, and this would be like having pieces of wet chewing gum stuck in your hair, dense matted deposits, and it's harder for the body to dissolve those clots. And the myeloperoxidase released by the neutrophils also binds to the plasma membrane of the red blood cells and distorts its shape. Here, this red blood cell shaped like a tear, so they call this a teardrop. Okay, and as you can imagine, this is going to be this distorted red blood cell shape here is going to be less effective at delivering oxygen to the tissue, and it's also going to be more prone to forming clots. It's going to have a less effective negative charge distribution and zeta potential. Here's a picture. I kind of meant to show this earlier. The idea of iron in the correct spot in the stove or the fireplace is good. You can cook with it, you can warm your house with it, but when it gets in the wrong place, it just burns stuff down. Okay, so Ed Weinberg, PhD, he says, you want it where you need it, you don't want it anywhere else. So this painting here is Burning City by Egbert Vanderpoel. So that's a disaster. Okay, nowadays they iron enrich a lot of foods, which is a really stupid thing to do. So again, when I was a young guy, I was stupid. I didn't know anything about nutrition. Like when I was about 20 years old, so I would want to eat Raisin Bran cereal because I wanted the extra iron because I thought it was a good thing to be strong like Popeye. But that was stupid. So here would be like a single ingredient. Nowadays I only eat things that have one ingredient. Organic whole grain oats. Okay, iron is 1 milligram per serving. Okay, but when you eat it, Raisin Bran where they add iron to it, you got 4.5 milligrams, so 4.5 times more iron added in. It's not a good type of iron either. So, don't eat iron fortified foods. And the way you can avoid them is only eat stuff with one ingredient. Preferably get something that's not even in a bag or a box. All right, relatively normal red blood cells. They're round. They got increased lucency in the center because they're more narrow. That shape is called discoid. The lucency in the center is called central pallor. This would be looking at a microscope, a light microscope, at red blood cells. Okay, and you can look at a lymphocyte. In general, the size of the lymphocyte nucleus is about the size of a red blood cell. It's a good way to remember it. So here's normal again. With iron deficiency anemia, the red blood cell is small, so it's called a microcyte. With B12, it's big, so it's called a macrocyte. Here's the echinocyte we showed before, the spur cell, if you will, where the spurs go circumferentially all around it. Here's an acanthocyte, the thorn-like, and there's just a few spurs coming off of it. Okay, and here's other distorted shapes we talked about in the setting of excess iron. And this is with amyloidogenic clotting. You'll also get teardrop-shaped red blood cells. You can get other deformed shapes of red blood cells as well. And because you got more of that with the Alzheimer's, it's associated with that form of dementia. This is just, we sort of talked about that before as well. Most of the cells in your blood are red blood cells. Okay, we actually covered this already, I think. Okay, here's the two of them. Here's their picture. So she is Etheresia Pretorius, PhD lady from South Africa, smart lady. And that's Douglas Kell, PhD guy from England. Okay, and he's the one who's got a 1-hour lecture online about a systems approach to dementia. And it's a great lecture. It's a magnificent lecture, okay? The guy's kind of a genius, all right? But, like I said, he's fatso, which, again, I find amusing. Okay, so here's normal red blood cells. Here's normal fibrinogen, fibrin, and thrombin clotting around them. And then here's a distorted red blood cell because you have high iron in the blood and, now shaped like a teardrop. And here it is with abnormally clotted fibrin that's amyloidogenic, forming dense deposits rather than being just like pieces of spaghetti. And like they're saying, when there's increased blood-brain barrier permeability, some of this clotted material here gets across the blood-brain barrier, the fibrinogen molecules, and they're causing precipitation of the beta amyloids in the extracellular matrix. And that beta amyloid precipitation can then damage neurons. Okay, here's one of their papers: iron dysregulation and dormant microbes as causative agents for impaired blood rheology, clotting, and flow patterns, viscosity, and their pathological role in Alzheimer's dementia. So if you want to read something related to Douglas Kell and Etheresia Pretorius, this is the kind of paper you want. The role of iron dysregulation, leaky gut for dormant microbes, causing abnormal blood rheology, blood clotting, blood thickening in Alzheimer's dementia. All right? So this is really sort of their big theory, and this is one of the big theories of dementia causation. Okay, so I just want you to know, these guys are really popular, admired, and respected in the science world, Douglas Kell and Etheresia Pretorius. And I'm impressed by them too. I like them, and I think his lecture is magnificent, okay? Do I think this is the main cause? No. I think the theories of Jack Delatorre and my theory are the best, most common explanations for dementia. But the point I make is that it's not one thing. There's a whole bunch of things that are all pushing towards dementia, and this is one of them. And this is why you want to do what you can to avoid leaky gut, and you want to do what you can to avoid being iron overloaded. And that's also like my little joke is, people say, well, Dr. McDougall said aluminum is the main cause of Alzheimer's dementia. And I'm like, yeah, aluminum, they're right. Aluminum is a major brain neurotoxin. But I kind of joke because I know a lot more about the brain than Dr. McDougall does, okay? And I joke that it reminds me of Hamlet talking to Horatio when Hamlet said, there are more things on heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. That, yeah, there's a lot of things besides aluminum that are neurotoxic. Okay, amyloidosis of a protein. We talked about that it changed from the alpha helix cylindrical configuration by intramolecular hydrogen bonding to beta flat sheets like pieces of paper due to inter, meaning between the different molecules. Inter, ending in ER, means between the different molecules, versus intra means within the same molecule itself. And this leading to big precipitates of the fibrin and the thrombin, and that make it harder to lyse. Okay, so harder to clear away and harder to help the patient get better. Okay, so here's an Alzheimer's patient with high serum ferritins, got these abnormal red blood cells, somewhat tear-shaped, somewhat acanthocyte-shaped, having spurs on it. This one's almost echinid shaped, having circumferential spurs on it, little projections outward. And then LPS associated with bacteria are part of what's doing all this stuff, okay? Causing this amyloidogenic clotting. Okay, so again, here's normal clotting, like pieces of spaghetti with normal fibrin, and here's the dense matted deposits when you've got bacterial LPS in there and you've got excess Fe. Either one can do it, the LPS, bacterial endotoxin, or the LTA, the other bacterial toxin from LPS is from gram-negative bacteria. LTA is going to be from gram-positive bacteria, or if you have excessive iron overloaded. All right. So that's kind of what I was talking about in this talk. So being iron overloaded is really bad, and so is having leaky guts really bad. And it took a while to get here. And this slide right here is a little bit like the grand finale at the fireworks show. Okay, normal control, and they're not showing much amyloid-like material. Okay, here's the paper. Both lipopolysaccharide, LPS from gram negatives, and lipoteichoic acid, that's from gram-positive bacteria, are very potent to cause anomalous, abnormal fibrin, blood clotting protein, amyloid formation, meaning amyloidogenic, meaning abnormal clotting of the fibrin, which normally should be like an alpha helix and relatively reversible, to being like a beta pleated sheet, insoluble, and that is an amyloidogenic transformation to go from alpha helix to beta pleated sheet. And they're showing that you can stain it. And so for when they put LPS in the medium with the red blood cells, or LTA or iron, every single one of them cause this amyloidogenic coagulation process. And so here's a normal control. You have hardly anything of these fluorescing stains. LPS, pop, pop, pop. Added iron, pop, pop, pop. Lipoteichoic acid, pop, 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 pop. Hallelujah. Okay, that was the big grand finale of the fireworks. It's like, holy shit, what a disaster, what a mess. So what I'm sort of saying is leaky gut's not a little bit bad. It's really bad for you. Even if you don't have an autoimmune disease, it's bad for you. Okay? All right, and I got another slide. I think it's an academic orgasm coming after this one. Well, this is just more of, Douglas Kell and Etheresia Pretorius, paper. They're showing their mechanism. Starting out with leaky gut and leaky gums. You're going to get dormant bacteria in the blood. They're going to get reactivated by iron, microbial reactivation. Then with iron dysregulation causing redox cycling, you're going to produce these free radicals. You're going to get oxidative stress and damage. And just from the fat itself, you're going to have increased blood-brain barrier permeability. And then you're going to get some entry across the blood-brain barrier of the fibrin. There's also amyloid beta protein that's outside the brain. There's some that's in the brain, there's some outside the brain, and there's some that can go backwards from the periphery into the brain area. And the bottom line is you're going to get precipitation of beta amyloid aggregates around the brain, and that's thought to kill the neurons. Okay, you get more blood-brain barrier gaps in older people because they got more areas of brain blood vessels damaged by hypertension and diabetes, previous small strokes. Okay, we talked about what iron does. We talked about how leaky gut lets it all in. All right, so I think the next slider is coming up real soon. Okay, here's what I wanted to show you. This, by the way, is an academic orgasm. I'm about to show you something really cool here. These are, a single yellow circle might be like one molecule of beta amyloid, okay? When you have just a small number of them all clumped together, that's called an oligomer rather than a polymer. And so these small clumps of them, which can get bigger and bigger as they precipitate more and more beta amyloid proteins out of solution, they can then bump against the plasma membrane of a neuron. And where they bump against the membrane could be next to what is called the NMDA receptor. This is the sometimes called mDAR alpha receptor. And this is the receptor that glutamate binds to, the excitatory neurotransmitter, opens it up, and calcium flows through this into the post synaptic neuron and causes it to be activated. And the point I'm making is anything that abnormally activates this neuron more than it should be activated is an excitotoxin. And the research experiments have shown that when beta amyloid starts precipitating, it starts coming out of solution and bumping against these receptors in their adjacent plasma membranes, causing these receptors to open up and allowing abnormal increased amounts of calcium to flow into these neurons. And that is how a prion can have an influence on cellular function. In addition, these initially small oligomers can keep accumulating more and more precipitated, meaning coming out of solution beta amyloid molecules, and they can get bigger and bigger, and they can push on other molecules of beta amyloid and cause them to precipitate. And that's a mechanism by which a protein can spread to other proteins like a domino effect. So what I'm showing you here is actually a fantastically interesting thing. The idea that a protein can spread a disease by precipitation, coming out of solution and becoming insoluble, growing in bulk size, and that bulk size both activating neuronal membrane calcium channels and also causing other beta amyloid proteins to precipitate out of solution. So that's rather fascinating. You can see here they'll say activation of the NMDA receptor is excitotoxicity. And I can assure you, excitotoxicity is a major cause of brain damage, and hardly anybody knows about it. And this idea of prion mechanism spread like dominoes is quite fascinating, okay? And how do you win the game? The way you win the game is you avoid all this stuff as much as you can, and the way you do that is what we've been talking about. Avoid things that cause leaky gut, eat the low-fat, low-sodium vegan diet, so you avoid all this dietary fat. And don't be a chump when everybody tells you, oh, you need to eat more nuts and seeds and all this other crap. Okay, here's just a couple of the references. There's actually a bunch more. This is an old set of references. And okay, that's all I got. I know that was a long talk. I hope that was interesting.